the big change from old SAT math to new SAT math is the questions on the new SAT math are much more what we can call, I guess, straightforward in the sense that a lot of them are stuff you've seen before, you've done before in your math class. As long as you understand the concepts and the ideas and you understand the step-by-step procedure, they're typically pretty standard. Whereas in the old SAT, that often wasn't the case. And for that reason, because they're much more straightforward, they're much more like math questions in your math test taking tips or gimmicks or, like super duper secret strategies aren't really going to be as useful or necessary on this test. There are some, and we're going to work through, making estimates or eliminating choices or other things like that, but they're just not as useful, except for one technique, which just still universally works very well. Doesn't work as well maybe on the old SAT, but it still works pretty often, and that's called plugging in. And there are two kinds of plugging in. The first is plugging in your own numbers. And the way plugging in your own numbers might be viable is if you look at the answer choices, and the answer choices all have variables in them, or the question itself kind of defines a variable that you could plug in a number for. That's a good sign that plugging in your own numbers would be a good idea. So I will demonstrate this in some of the questions. Others I'll tell you can plug in and allow you to try it yourself. I will go through these questions in later videos, so you'll have to wait for the answers to them there. But these questions are ones that we can do plugging in, and sometimes it can make us, it can allow us to avoid doing some nasty algebra, or it'll simplify the problem in some kind of way. One thing I want to mention is when you're testing your choices, when you plug in a number and then you're evaluating your choices, you always want to test all four choices. You always want to test all four choices because you never know. Sometimes when you plug in, you can get two choices that work. So let's say B and D here. And if you just stop at B and you don't realize that D could be an answer, you might get it wrong if D turns out to be the answer. And if you get two or more that work, you just plug in a new number. It's not a tragedy. You'll never get the wrong answer by plugging in. You just might get more than one answer. And then you got to narrow down further by testing a new number. Now, there are some numbers that are bad, generally speaking, to plug in, and there's some numbers that are good, generally speaking, to plug in. I'll go through the bads first. Plugging in 0 is generally a bad idea. It's just, sometimes it doesn't make sense, right? If you're talking about X CDs and you say 0 CDs, what the heck is going on? So 0 is generally a bad number to plug in. 1 is generally a bad number to plug in just because you get, not that these are going to lead you to the wrong answers, it's just like you're going to get 2 or 3 that are going to work. It's just not going to get you anywhere. So avoid 0, avoid 1. Also avoid numbers in the question, generally speaking. So if you have 2 and 6 already somewhere in the question, plugging in 2 and 6 may not be a great idea. Again, you won't get the wrong answer. It just may take some more time. Now, let's say you are plugging in numbers, and let's say it's a must-be-true question where you have to plug in all different kinds of numbers to test different choices. The first place you want to start is, generally speaking, positive integers. I mean, that's where most people begin, right? So 2, 8, 100, right? Standard numbers. That's a good place to start. If you need more, if you need to test out different kinds of numbers, don't forget that you might be able to plug in negative integers. Don't forget about, besides integers, you can perhaps do positive fractions or negative fractions. In some circumstances, this kind of goes against what I talked about in the previous set. Plugging in 0 can actually help in certain circumstances eliminate choices quickly or help you notice something that you wouldn't have noticed before. But again, I would do that one last. I would do these first. And usually doing the first 4 will be good enough. And almost always, really, for the bulk of our questions, just doing a positive integer, one positive integer is good enough. It's just these are the variety of number types that you could plug in to possibly get you different answers to help you eliminate choices or just get down to the answer. Plugging in the answers is a little bit different. We're not going to plug in our own number. Instead, we're going to take the numbers and the answer choices, plug them into the problem, and see which one's consistent with the problem. Here, as soon as you find one that works, you're done because there's only going to be one that works. So here are two cases. Here you've got like a specific thing. In this case, the hours Angelica worked. You can plug that in and see if it makes sense with the problem. Here you're given an equation and you want to know the value of n, so you can just, if you want to, plug in these n values, see what happens. And finally, even if you solve a question algebraically or directly, plugging in your answer when you get it to check is just a really good way of triangulating, right? It's a really good way of confirming or just supporting the answer that you got. When you plug in your x is 10 and you get the answer that makes sense, it's a good sign you did it right. So again, plugging in your answers can help you get the answer. It can also help you check your answer.